Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Sugar Mama's Fireplay podcast. I am Canna Campbell. Two quick things before we begin this morning's podcast. Number one, please make sure you read the general advice, warning, and disclaimer along with my license details. Any of my podcasts, YouTube videos, blog posts, or anything you see on Instagram is always general advice. The reason why is because I don't know anything about your financial situation, your financial goals, your risk profile, or of course the deadlines for any of those goals and dreams that you want to achieve. So please always bear that in mind, and there is never any product advice. Also, please make sure that you are following me on Instagram at SugarMamaTV, because this is where I provide you with all the swipe up links to access my content immediately. And of course, you're always welcome to follow along with me on my fun Instagram account at Canna Campbell Official, where I share with you inside motherhood, minimalism, capsule wardrobe fashion, and my latest beauty hacks, as well as me just trying to keep it together with a good sense of humor in a challenging world. All right, enough from me. Let's get started with this morning's podcast. Enjoy. An overwhelming breakdown to have an undeniable breakthrough. Today, I'm particularly grateful. I'm grateful because I'm able to share the space for you to hear this story. This is Emma's story. Through this podcast, you're going to hear her great and very wise and savvy budgeting and cash flow hacks that helped her save over $40,000 as emergency savings. And might I add, build a diversified share portfolio for her daughter, which is going to help pay for her daughter's secondary education and potentially a very much well-deserved early retirement for Emma. But what you're going to love about this is she did this as a single mother with a broken heart. So not only did she build herself financially again, she's also built herself emotionally. And with great pleasure and pride and honor, I now share with you Emma's story. You're going to absolutely love this one. Today, I am really excited about sharing, or not so much sharing, actually like creating the space for you to hear Emma's story. When I read Emma's email, I just couldn't believe how she's managed to keep it all together after what she experienced. The physical pain, the emotional pain, and what she has done for her daughter. So everyone, I would love to meet Emma. Emma, thank you so much for taking your time today to share this important story with everyone.
Thanks so much for having me. It's so exciting to talk to you.
Now, there's just so many important elements and hacks and words of wisdom and strength in your story. Can you start from the very, very beginning after your daughter was born? What happened and what suddenly changed?
My husband and I have had the one child together, and uneventful pregnancy, perfectly fine, had my baby, and I had a year's maternity leave. I work in the tertiary sector, and they're very generous with maternity leave and provisions, and flexible work arrangements come to that. So that was all perfectly cruisy, nothing to complain about. Mm-hmm. Had my daughter. The year of maternity leave was tough, which sounds like a strange thing to say, but I was used to working in an industry that I loved and getting a lot achieved. I had outside of the home, which I loved, which had to suddenly stop, and I was very sleep deprived. I need my sleep, and my daughter wasn't a fantastic sleeper. And I was actually pretty miserable, which sounds strange, but it was. Looking back on it, I was breastfeeding, I was pumping, I was chained to a breast pump all the time, and it just seemed like Groundhog Day of stuff going around and around and around.
Your first child, that's not unusual. We go from being this like go-getter, we power through our lists. We have so much freedom and independence that we don't granted before children. And
totally.
All of a sudden, you no longer feel like, well, for me, I no longer felt great about myself and, living in, tracksuit pants all day and your body's not yours. It's the machine.
I struggled. And look, I had it easier than so many other people. Breastfeeding was fine. Okay, my daughter wasn't a great sleeper, but that's standard. And intellectually, I knew about all of that. Emotions are not rational. And I struggled big time. And then she started teething very early. And that's, of course, up all hours of the night. After that year of mat leave, I went back to work thinking that would be good. No, that was a challenge too. I went back to a new position because there'd been a restructure while I got pregnant.
Yeah.
So I wanted to have a position, but I went back to a role that I didn't know, having to supervise people that knew more than me. And I was still very sleep deprived. And my dad started to get all the daycare illnesses that you get when you go into daycare, and she was still teething. Look, when I look back on those first 3 months back at work, they were probably worse than mat leave. 3 months after I went back to work, my husband suddenly informed me that he was leaving me for someone else.
So you're just trying to get back in, trying to get your mojo back in the workforce again, and dealing with not just, getting back into the new routine, but also a new role.
Yes.
You've got a daughter who's not sleeping, is teething and catching every single bug in daycare, then passing it to you. Then you're not only tired, you're now unwell. And your husband turns around and says, I'm leaving you for somebody else.
We've been together for a long, long time. We actually were best friends for some of our childhood and got together at university. So this had been a very long-term thing. And looking back on it now, there were signs during that year of maternity leave, but I was just so busy keeping up just with motherhood that I just didn't see them. I was desperately trying to patch things up, and he went along with it. But looking back on it, he was never giving that a fair shake. He was still seeing this other person.
He'd checked out.
Yeah, when I discovered that, I ended things and he moved out. And there I was, single, with a young child in a situation that I just never dreamed of.
Yeah.
And suddenly had to work out whether, for example, I was going to be able to live financially, because I'd always been a saver and a budgeter, but always with 2 wages. And to be fair, he paid child support right from the start. It sort of annoys me when people say, oh, but he's paying child support. Yes, he is. But 1 wage and child support is vastly different from 2 wages.
Absolutely. And child support is not much at all. You speak to any single mother and they'll tell you it's near to impossible to survive, and you are really living off the basics and the essentials only. There's no splurges or luxuries whatsoever.
No.
Can I ask you, how did you emotionally get through that time?
Some of the time I didn't. I do remember lying on the floor in a fetal position, just feeling like I could not handle the physical pain of what he was saying. It was just by getting through it each day. And then very, very, very gradually over time, those feelings of pain just regress little by little by little, no longer affecting you every minute. Some moments where you're content, and then it gradually widens a bit like a stream, I think.
I found myself just on that note of pain, and you're trying to, get through the pain, and you're not trying to get over it. You have to sit through the pain and let it pass. You find when you do it properly, the pain, next time that wave of pain comes, it's not as intense, or it doesn't last as long. And as you say, there's a bigger gap between the next wave of pain. And instead of just getting through hour by hour of the day or day by day, you're getting through week by week and then month by month. You've got to go through the pain. You can't just sweep it under the mat. It just must have felt like your world was crashing around you left, right and centre.
It was pretty hideous. I remember thinking with the anti-inflammatories, I wish that there was an anti-inflammatory for hearts.
No, I
think of my hand, and I just wish there was something I could take for emotional pain, but it doesn't quite work that way.
Okay, so there you are. You get a small amount of child support, which we know doesn't add that much value when you're on one income as a single parent. You said it in your email to me. You've always been good with money. Like, can you talk me through what your definition of being good with money is, and how you went to cut your discretionary spending?
Well, I was good with money only in the sense that I didn't fall into some common pitfalls, but I wasn't wise with money in that I knew how to grow it. So my parents are much older parents, and they have a natural frugality about them that I grew up with, which I actually really appreciate. So they would have dreamt of spending beyond their means or using credit or doing anything of that sort. They were naturally frugal. My dad is a much older dad, grew up during the Depression. My mother is a country girl, and they never had much money as farmers, and her parents actually scraped together enough from the farm to send 3 children to private boarding schools in Melbourne. So that shows you, by example, just instilled in me that you spend less than you earn, and you don't try to keep up with the lifestyle of others. And that's a really good lesson in itself. So I had always lived within my means, and my ex-husband and I were both fairly good about living within our means and paying extra off our mortgage. So we're paying a lot extra off our mortgage and we weren't in any consumer debt. But that's as far as it went. I didn't know anything else about really serious saving or investing. So that's where I started from. So yes, I didn't have any consumer debt and I knew how to budget. I'd always had a personal budget for my expenses. But the point that I was starting out at, I didn't know whether my wage and child support were going to cover my current living expenses. And that was what was keeping me up at night. So I needed to work out whether I was solvent, basically.
So how did you do your budget?
I already had a budget for my personal spending. So things like, my makeup, my phone, my outings, my clothes. And I just tracked down all the household bills for electricity and rates. I knew what the mortgage was. We were paying half of that each. And basically just did a whopping great spreadsheet with a million lines in it, which is very inefficient. But I would itemize things that you would think could go in with other things. So I really had a track on it. So off I went and put it into a monster spreadsheet and was relieved to find that with my wage and child support that the loop was closing.
You were able to keep your head above water.
Yes. Now, I knew that wasn't enough because at that point I didn't have an emergency fund and I wasn't saving anything. So I thought I could do much better than that. So then I started to think, okay, well, we need to be cutting things here. And I started on that circus.
Was there a time when you were going through your budget and you thought, you know what, this is getting depressing. Like I'm cutting this, I'm cutting that, this is being reduced. I can't go much further than this. Like, did you have that moment?
I actually got to that last. I did the big stuff that's no fun first. So I refinanced the house and I changed energy providers, which cut my electricity bill. And I started the process in motion to get solar panels because our local council does a really good deal with solar panels that they give you an interest-free loan on. Changed my car insurance, changed my phone data provider, changed my Wi-Fi provider, just went through all the stuff that you're paying for it, but you don't care who provides it. It's not stuff that I'm going to regret changing or that I miss anything. So did all that.
It's really interesting you say that because a lot of people just are complacent with those types of bills. The utilities, the Foxtel, mobile phones, they assume that they're on a good enough plan and that will do. And there's probably also not just complacency, but, an element of laziness because you think, I've got to call a 1-800 number and sit on their phone for an hour. And, I don't even know if I'm really getting a great deal. But quite often, even if you call up to say, look, I'm thinking of cutting or changing providers or cutting my Foxtel, whatever it might be, they'll often come up with a great plan for you. So it's a lot easier and quicker than we realize. And it's amazing, particularly with the energy companies, when you think about changing or you look up what new offers they've got, because quite often we're on an expired rate and our rates are reverted to the higher rate. It's amazing the savings that can be found. So anyone that's thinking of looking for money in their budgets, start there.
It was thousands of dollars. And look, with the energy provider, I didn't even have to have an uncomfortable conversation. I just did an online analysis thing with the energy provider I was on now and what my energy usage was like. You just have to have a bill there to plug in some information.
Yeah.
And it came up better providers for me and I just sent emails off and changed. I didn't even have a conversation.
You go with getting through those expenses, which are, like your, maybe it might be a nice face cream or maybe it's a new dress or a scarf. Like those ones when you're going through your budget, looking at those ones which are an act of self-love. How did you get your head around looking at your budget then?
Well, there were some things that I kept just completely, other things that I kept, but I just stretched them out a little bit more. So, for example, if I like getting my eyebrows done, I would just try to last, 6 weeks rather than 4 or something. So some luxuries I would just stretch. Some things I did get rid of because I just decided they weren't adding a lot of value. I was drinking a super expensive kind of a protein powder and I just decided that a different one would do. It actually tastes better. And makeup and so forth, some of it I kept, some skincare I kept, and some I just got onto YouTube and said, what's a really good dupe for this? There are a zillion people out there to tell you that something else works exactly the same as whatever you're using and it costs.
Lotions and potions come out of the same factory as well. So it's easy. It's actually very easy to access that information, as you say. Okay, so you've cut your budget. You've found a way to keep your head above water for you and your daughter. You then go on to building up some emergency savings. How much did you save and how did you do it? And how did you work out how much you needed?
I sort of started off very gung-ho. This is the start of 2017 and I was really very motivated about getting a whole lot of money in the bank. I discovered your channel and I had binged every video you had and sometimes way more than one, especially the investing ones. I wanted to open an online trading account and start buying, but I didn't want to do that until I had an emergency fund.
Smart move, very smart move.
And even then, I just needed to let it percolate in my brain for quite a while. I wasn't ready quite yet. So I wanted a big bank account, and then I would start trading. And that suited me because it took 18 months before I actually bought my first lot of shares. It took ages.
And so you use that 18 months just to keep on building up your emergency savings in the meantime.
Yeah, yes. And also to just think and listen to things and really absorb information, because I didn't have a clue about that world. It was literally just, I thought that the stock market went up and down and you lost all your money in a day, and it was all about people standing yelling buy and sell. I had no idea. So I just needed to let it all sit and listen to lots of things. So off I went saving. With my original budget and all the cuts, I worked out that I save about $26,000 a year.
Wow, $26,000 a year. So did you put a savings plan in your budget? Okay, well, I earn, say, this much money per month after tax, and I have this much expenses for the month, which leaves a gap of this much. I'll put that into a separate savings account and build it up that way. To build up your emergency savings was almost budgeted in.
It was budgeted in, but that was the base amount, and then I saw any extra as a bonus. So what I did with my budget was that I tend to budget up a little bit. So I tend to round up a bit. I tend to have money.
I recommend that myself, and I do that as well.
Yeah, I love doing that because then I'm so excited when things come in under. It's so nerdy. And I had other things built in there, such as my home appliances going belly up. And I was assuming in the first year that I'd need to replace my washing machine, my dishwasher, and probably my microwave, because they're all getting elderly. Yeah. But none of them in that first year. So
it was kind to you. Gave you a break.
I would, yeah, and I get paid every fortnight. So I would get to the end of every fortnight, pay my credit card off in full, pay anything else that I had, and then I would literally just take all the extra and sling it into a savings account. So sometimes that was quite a lot more than what I'd budgeted in. And a couple of times I did myself under and left myself a bit skint, so I had to just calm down a bit.
Yeah.
Putting money into savings, calm down, because what I didn't want to do was have to drag it back out of savings, because then I wasn't paid my interest and I was a bit fanatical about that.
Did you review your budget on a regular basis?
I did. I love to get the spreadsheet up and twinkle it up and down, especially if I'm twinkling it down, if something's come in under cost, which just shows what a terrible nerd I became, because I was never a numbers person.
How often did you check your emergency savings account?
A lot. I'm ashamed to say. It was kind of like a squirrel checking her store of nuts. It was every fortnight, and then I'd check it when my interest went in. It was my little security.
That's not bad. Like that, God, I don't think that's bad at all. I mean, if you were saying twice a day, I'd be all right. But I think it's important because it's when you check your emergency savings, you see that progress, it ignites the motivation and energy to keep going, because you can say, look, I am heading in the right direction. I think it's so important to check your whether it be your savings account or your investment account or your budget, because it shows you that you're on track. And also especially with your budget, you can stop any new expenses that are always trying to sneak into our budget. You catch them.
Yeah, that's right. And I did feel a bit silly. I mean, the only person I was talking to this about really were my parents, and they were all for saving and whatever, but they're also of the mindset that money is a bit negative. So they've got a bit of an inbuilt suspicion about people with money, and, they sort of align it with greed. So when I talk about my savings account, my mother would sort of say, God, you're like Scrooge McDuck, rolling around in piles of money. Just leave it alone kind of thing. I'd be like, but it's my safety.
It's really interesting what that different mentality with money across the different generations. You've got to look at, well, what does that represent to you? And it's completely your business how you look at your money. And for you, that money represents security. It represents a safety net. It gives you it alleviates the financial stress in your life, particularly as you are a single mother. Whereas, I can understand also your parents' attitude and approach, but you're thinking more long term, and you're coming from a more, in my opinion, a more informed and educated space, because you understand what that represents, and also you understand the opportunity that money represents for not just yourself but also for your daughter. So quite often it's when you look at that, you often see it in not just generations but in different cultures as well. Sometimes it's just simply a lack of understanding and financial literacy.
And look, it was also my checking point to see, because I'd never had significant savings before. We'd saved for a home deposit, but that was fairly quick. And then all money went into the mortgage. So I wanted to see that what I was doing was working and that my numbers were right, because I still doubted myself a bit, even after 6 months of this. And I suddenly expected some big bill that I hadn't even thought of to come in and to wipe it all out, because I wasn't sure that it was possible. So nothing happened. Along I went, and at the end of 12 months, I had $40,000 in my savings account, which was this massive milestone. And back then, interest rates weren't quite as tragic as they are now. That was a bit of money every month. But then there was actually some interest to show for it. And then I get really edgy about the fact that, okay, I've got all this money, that's great, but it's sitting there being eaten alive by inflation. Now I have to start investing.
Did you have in your mind an amount that you wanted to have as emergency money that would make you feel good? Did you say, I want this much money, or it just happened, you went, okay, wow, that's enough?
Back then, I thought I wanted around $30,000 because that was about 6 months worth of living expenses for me. Books I was reading were saying about 6 months worth of living expenses. Now that Corona has hit and you really see what the world can do in the space of a couple of months, now I'm working on it to build it up to being a full year. And I know that people will be horrified about having a full year's worth of cash sitting in a savings account, not doing anything. And I get that. But for me, a full year as a single wage earner is what's going to help me sleep at night going forward. But back then it was about 30 grand that I wanted. So once I'd gone over it, I started to get edgy about, okay, I need to be doing something else with this money, not letting it sit there.
Can I ask you, how did it feel when you would log into your internet banking and see that money in your savings account? What did it feel like?
Oh, it was amazing. It just gave me a sense of security like nothing else. It was amazing. And the knowledge that, not that I wanted to spend it, but, a couple of weeks ago this year, I actually had my appendix out unexpectedly, bad stomach pain, off private hospital, appendix out. And I just didn't worry about it. I mean, I worried about the fact that I was sick, but I didn't worry about the fact that I was going to go and pay whatever it was to get my appendix taken out. There was no concern about that. If my daughter needed treatment for something, no concern about that. Whatever happens, I'll pay for it. And that's the feeling that you get with that money in the bank it's different from everything.
Can I also point out the fact that you should have immense pride in yourself that you did this purely yourself? This is not, your husband's contributions or, you doing as a team. You can look at that money and that bank balance and go, I saved and budgeted every single cent in that account. It all boiled down to my hard work, my dedication, my self-discipline. Like, that is something that I think is an important building block as you transition, as you become a single parent. We can easily forget about the hard work we've done. So I want to make sure you remind yourself of that.
Look, it really did. It made me feel so good. And I deliberately didn't cut anything to do with my daughter either. So I made the decision really early that she did lots of little activities. She does a music class and a sporting activity called Ready, Steady, Go, which most parents will know about. And she still has all of those things and, the education things that I wanted to have and what have you. So I wasn't ever going to cut anything for her because most of the reason I was doing it was for her. So that was a big aim, and that continued too. And her daycare centre, which is really quite expensive, but I love it. There was no question of me pulling her out and finding somewhere cheaper or whatever. That wasn't a thing.
I want to move on to now investing because, your daughter has a really big role in this story.
She does.
You came up with a goal, which is really, when I read this, I was so proud. You decided to build up a diversified investment portfolio that paid dividends that could in turn help pay for her private education, tertiary, for secondary schooling. In my book, Mindful Money, I actually have a whole chapter dedicated to this. You've done this before I've published this book because you've started a few years ago, and Mindful Money only came out in August last year. And what I say in my book is I see all these parents who are so concerned about the cost of private education in Australia. And I'm not for or against private education. I'm for whatever the family thinks is best. But I say in Mindful Money, don't save for your child's education, because what happens is you save up all this money, you pay for your child's education. At the end of the process, when they finish school or graduate, you're left with nothing. Whereas if you can rethink the way you think about money and your child's education, why don't you invest for your child's education? And that is build up an investment portfolio of whatever your heart desires, where that income can pay for that child's education every single year, or help pay for that child's education each year. And then when they graduate, you are still left with that asset. You're still left with that investment portfolio that still continues on paying that income. And perhaps you can then use that income for yourself finally, after, going through so much, I guess, scrimping and saving and investing. Or you could potentially hand that investment portfolio over to your child. You already was smarter than before I even wrote this book. You already have started doing this. So can you talk me through what you did and what you decided, and what was, like, how you got this idea?
Well, I'd love to take credit, but it was still your videos.
Oh, okay. Okay.
It was. It just wasn't called, you didn't call it that then, but you put a couple of videos up about dividend investing. And full disclosure, first I had to pause your video and Google the word dividend, because I only had a vague idea of what that meant. I mean, I'd heard people say that will pay dividends and whatever, but didn't really understand it. So watched those videos and researched it, and this big bell went off in my head that, you can invest in shares and not rely on capital growth or selling those shares. You can rely on dividend income. It's like buying a house without all the debt and without all the work and tenants and damage and whatever.
And you don't pay stamp duty either. Like,
oh my God. I went, and we're in a perfect country to do this, because Australia is kind of the kingdom of dividend paying shares. So I was...
franking credits, which are very valuable tax credits for people who don't know what they are. And the other thing about shares is, you know, with a property, you have to save, I mean, for years and years and years to come up with a deposit and a deposit big enough to try and avoid mortgage insurance if you're lucky. And, that is, years and years of opportunity costs missed from other investment opportunities. You can buy shares as little as $500 if you want to. Personally, I'd probably recommend with brokerage that you wait until you've got 1,000. But it is very easy to start. You could be an investor by the end of the day, whereas it's painfully slow and boring with property, unfortunately.
Oh, look, I was just so excited. And so then I thought, okay, well, I've got this overflow in my emergency fund, which is lovely and cozy, but it's doing nothing. And I'm starting to feel bad about it. So it's time, and I opened a share trading account with ANZ, which I think the only reason is because it's the one you used, and I was perving on your videos trying to work out which button you were pressing, and literally over your shoulder, like, what's she doing now?
ASIC would be really upset at me right now, because I have all those general advice disclaimers to tell people don't copy what I'm doing. It's general advice only. But I mean, I'm laughing.
I know you get into trouble, but it was all me, it wasn't you. I did that and took $10,000 out of my emergency fund and put it into 5 different holdings, which was huge to me. I was so excited. So I think and this is awful too, but I kind of followed your portfolio. I know you weren't.
Sorry, Ashley.
Sorry. I know, but that was me. It was me. So I stuck to things, industrial shares that I knew really well. I think my first one ever without blowing the lid off anything was Woolworths, because heck, I shop there every week. Dividend paying shares. So off I went.
And also with something like a defensive stock like that, no matter what's going on in the world, we still need to go to the supermarket and buy bread and milk, and if we have kids, nappies and
it was kind of fun walking in there every week thinking, well, I'm paying into a company that I own part of. And I thought, okay, well, if dividends, even if I'm being super conservative in the dividends I'm paid of 4%, even if I don't get any capital growth, because I don't intend to ever sell these shares, if I just reinvest dividends, I'm doing far better out of this than I am with my savings account with its tragic interest rate of, God, what was it? By then it was probably 1.9 or something terrible. And then I thought, okay, well, if I save $40,000 in my first year, if I aim to invest between $35,000-ish and $40,000 every year.
Wow.
Now, and when my daughter starts secondary school, I could realistically have a portfolio of sort of $500,000 or more. 2028. I know that sounds insane, but that's when my daughter starts year 7.
That will fly by though.
And I've worked it out with lots of spreadsheety things, because that's just fun now. Could pay me income of between $25,000 and $30,000 by then.
Wow.
And, that her school fees had started around $23,000. So the idea would be that if I'm still employed and fine by then, I would just pay her school fees out of my wage and keep reinvesting those dividends. But if something happened and I lost my job or something went wrong, I could divert those dividends into my pocket and pay her school fees. So I wouldn't have to pull her out of her schooling if something went wrong for me, if I had this portfolio built up enough. And that was really, really appealing.
I was going to ask you that, like, knowing that you have that security of you can look at your daughter and go, no matter what happens, you're still going to go to a great school that we pick together, and I never need to worry about it. What does that feel like?
That's just great. And it was one of the big things when my marriage ended, that I had always envisaged a future for her, and that future was suddenly so much in jeopardy. And that was one of the things that hurt me so badly about that whole scenario. And my ex-husband still sees her every week. He's a good dad. He pays child support, but the future was still just shot to pieces. And look, I went to a private secondary school and I loved it. Not every kid is suited to that, and it will really depend what sort of kid she is. I just want to have every single option that I can and not be a slave to what's available or what zone we're in or whatever.
And that's the key thing here, is you have built the luxury of options in your financial situation. And not only have you built the options for your daughter, you've built the options for yourself, because when she does graduate, you then have the option of that income stream, whether you want to take it for yourself, whether you want to continue on reinvesting it, whether you want to use that income stream to help pay for, that might represent mortgage repayments if you do decide to buy another place or
That's right, yeah.
You decide you want to retire now. You have all those options, and that is a huge luxury in a modern day world. So many challenges and risks and obstacles to overcome, and also in the dynamic world that we're now living in.
That's the aim. I never want to sell any of these shares. I just want to keep building them, eventually retire on their dividend income, and then hand the whole thing over intact to my daughter when the time comes, and just have it there as her buffer against the world as well. Because who knows what employment's going to be like by the time she's a young adult, I hate to think.
What other things have you done in your financial situation? Obviously, we now know you've got a really switched on budget you're completely on top of. We know that you've got your emergency money sorted, and you're also continue on building that up. We know that you're investing for your daughter. What other things have you fixed in your life? Have you fixed up your superannuation? Have you taken out insurance policies?
Yes.
What other things have you done?
Yes, I did a big sweep of all that. So I work for a university and they belong to UniSuper. I actually think really highly of UniSuper. They've helped me a lot. So I went to see them and changed some of my allocations into slightly higher risk and some to lower risk, and also looked into what insurance I have within my super and beefed up certain elements of them. So it already has income protection, which is a huge bonus. I put more money into my total and permanent disability insurance within my super, which made me feel a lot better. And I took out a reasonably small critical illness policy with another insurer, just so that if I'm diagnosed with something really nasty, I've got quite a big payment to help me recuperate. And all other insurance I sort of cut back on. So my car is pretty much a bomb. I don't want to spend a cent more on that insurance. I need to. My home and contents is very moderate because I just don't have much stuff. I sell stuff as soon as I can. And my super I'm happy with, but I've never paid any attention to it before. So this was the moment to start paying attention, because I just sort of let it sit there. And I just added my contributions to my super a little bit to cover the amount that was going out for that total and permanent disability insurance, so that it wasn't sucking my super dry, basically.
Well, look, what you have done is just incredible. The strength and resilience you have displayed to yourself, but also to your daughter, is inspiring beyond belief. And what you have achieved is absolutely incredible. And your daughter will grow up, being so incredibly proud of you, and you are such an amazing role model to her. People who are listening to this right now, and there may be people listening to this that are in the thick of a separation, or have been a parent who have been struggling for a while and just looking for some sort of help and guidance, what would your advice be to that person that's feeling fragile, feeling fearful, feeling vulnerable, knowing what you know and knowing what you've done and how hard you've worked to do this? What would be your advice back to those people?
Probably just, as you mentioned earlier, to just allow yourself to sit with the pain for a while, because there's nothing you can do about the pain of a broken heart other than just wait for it to recede. And it will. But for me, it took a good solid 2 years to feel like I was making a big step towards healing. So just sit with it. And then when you're ready to, start making contingency plans for your future life. Because I found that even when I was heartbroken, when I was planning for a better future, when I was doing my budget and working out whether the numbers met and working out that I was going to survive and then working out that I could save and then working out that actually accelerated my healing process because I was taking some sort of action.
I love that. Planning for a better future. And
it really works. I call it constructive revenge.
And you know what, it does time, but it's what you choose to do with that time that matters as well. I mean, we could spend years sitting on the sofa, like, you know, in tears, having meltdowns continuously. It's easily done, but when we choose to use that time to plan for a better future, that's when we start to have a shift.
They were some of the only times when I was planning that I felt a little bit better in the morning period, that I felt just a little bit lighter because it was taking me out of that dark place and putting me somewhere else, really. And so it really worked. And sometimes I didn't have the emotional energy, but when I did, it really worked.
And advice, when you have those moments or those pockets of strength, seize them, because that will help you then get through the times where you're flat.
And just remember too that no period lasts forever. So I wasn't, full disclosure again, I wasn't much of a baby person. I love my daughter, but I have become much more enjoying of motherhood as she's gotten just a little bit older. The early phases of no sleep and breastfeeding and baby and toddlerhood were not kind of my bag, really, but none of that lasts forever.
If you like it.
They are brutal. None of that lasts forever. And whatever's happening right now with the sleepless nights and whatever, it'll pass. It'll pass. Just hang on.
Well, Emma, thank you so much. I really appreciate, you know, opening up your story, your life, and doing so with, you know, such honesty and dignity. I'm inspired by your story. As I said, I was reading it and I felt like I get so emotional when I read people's emails because I'm like going through the story with them as I read through the email, and I am just in awe of what you have created. So thank you so much for sharing your story with me. And as you say, your best advice, build a better life.
Thank you everyone for listening to Emma's amazing story. I really hope that it has filled you with strength, determination, and resilience, no matter what challenge you might be going through right now. And if I could ask one very small, quick favor, and that would be if you could please leave a rating and a review for Sugar Mama's Fireplay podcast. I would greatly appreciate it because that inspires me, encourages me, and gives me hope to keep going and making all of this free content for you. All right, everyone, enjoy the rest of your week. And of course, don't forget to make sure you're following me on Instagram at Sugar Mama TV and of course on my fun account at Canna Campbell Official. Ciao for now.
Always look to you for a warm embrace that kept me safe and free from harm. These days, everything's changed. Pull me through my darkest days, a constant phase where everything's a game. Always stuck in the